Washington Mornings on the Mall. 105.9 FM. And AM 630. WMAL.
637 on WMAL, where Washington comes to talk. At 8:35, we're going to be joined by Fox News' Brett Baer, and at 7:35, Jim Green from NASA to talk about how the sky is falling all over the world. Right now, though, Tori Clark, who is in for Brian Wilson, and I, Larry O'Connor, are joined by BRIAN MCNALLY. He is the Caps and Nats reporter for Washington Examiner. And before we get to, I want to talk about the Nationals because, listen, it's February. Tori, it's 36 degrees. We got snow in the forecast. There's nothing better than to focus on spring training.
It's that time of year.
And the fact that,
hope springs eternal.
Pitchers and catchers are reporting. But I just want to point out the Capitals won again last night. This is a 4-game winning streak. And BRIAN MCNALLY, have you pointed out to your readers at the Washington Examiner that the Capitals winning streak now began when owner Ted Leonsis came right here on Mornings on the Mall and gave us an interview and said he was fed up with the Caps losing, and ever since then they have not lost a game?
I have not. That's a nugget I didn't realize.
See, there you go. That's why we're here. We get results here on WMAL.
Well done.
Thanks for that.
I have a question for Brian about Brian before he gets into the Caps and Nats. How do you cover 2 major professional teams? Do you ever sleep?
No, never. Almost never. Usually the best part of that, Tori, is that anytime you have a day off, almost always somebody gets busted for something, like Gio Gonzalez or whatever.
There you go.
There's always one of those days
that
something goes down. But we obviously we don't travel with the team, so it's a little bit easier. There's not the demands to to always be on the road and that kind of stuff.
Okay, but baseball, it's 181 games?
86.
186 games? How many games for the Caps?
Caps normal season's 82, so you're going to have 40,
wow.
41 home games. This year, obviously, a little bit easier. Not as many home games. Just
thanks to the strike, yeah.
Thanks to the lockout kind of.
The lockout, yeah.
But the Caps are kind of slowly fighting their way back into this thing.
Yeah, in fact, let's dispense with the Caps real fast because I do want to talk about the Nats. But they're starting to win now, and they're starting to look like the team that a lot of people had hoped they'd look like because of the shortened season. Did that early start that was so dismal? Does it really pretty much put them out of playoff contention, or is there still a shot here? Because in hockey, if you make the playoffs, anything can happen. Last year, the number 8 team won the Stanley Cup.
No question. A couple players said that to me last week. It kind of looked, it was looking a little bleak. They were, I think, 7 points out and just couldn't find a way. They'd blown a couple games in the third period, and they were obviously frustrated. But a couple guys said that. They said, we learned last year, you don't have to win the President's Trophy. You don't have to finish first or get a top 3 seed. If you make it in, hockey is not like the NBA. You can easily win a round and build some momentum and suddenly find yourself deep in a playoff run, and it's kind of what happened to them last year. So at this point, they're just focusing on doing that. They play the Rangers on Sunday, a team that's directly ahead of them in the standings. So, and I think they're like in a 5-way tie for 11th or something right now. So it's really bunched up in the short season. Nobody's really played themselves out of it yet. So they're. I wouldn't say they're in good shape, but at least they still have a fighting chance.
What's made the difference for these last 3 games? What have they done differently?
Ted Leonsis coming on WMAL
That's right, I'm
last
sorry.
week.
Other than that,
coming on on your airwaves, I would say definitely, it's a team that's gotten used to their coach's system. I mean, they were at a huge disadvantage. You have a new coach coming in, wants to play a much different style than what they did last year. Under Dale Hunter, and he's got no training. He's got no training camp really. I think they had 6 practices in 7 days or something after the lockout ended, and he wasn't able to talk to his players for 5 or 6 months. There are other teams that had been with their coaches at least a year, 2, 3, 4 years in some cases. So I had a couple of opposing players say they thought the Caps were going to be a step behind almost from the jump. There was no way for them to make up for that lack of experience with their coaching staff, and you could see that. They were kind of uncomfortable the first couple games. They would get a lead, but they couldn't sustain it. There was no consistency to their play. They weren't terrible, they just weren't good enough, and that's finally kind of started turn for them, Tori.
Cool. So fun stuff happening at the Verizon Center. Continue to go support your Caps. Now let's turn to baseball. And BRIAN MCNALLY is our guest. He's a reporter for the Caps and the Nats there at the Washington Examiner. And boy, but talk about high expectations. Bryce Harper, first words out of his mouth when he talked to reporters this week was World Series. Is this for real? Should Nationals fans really raise our hopes up that high?
Yeah, Bryce is not subtle, is he? Bryce will answer the question put to him. Yeah, it's. I think so. I mean, given what they have back, they basically returned every key piece from last season. They went out, they needed a center fielder and a leadoff hitter, and they got that in one package in Denard Span. They traded their top prospect to the Twins for Denard Span, so he's going to be the center fielder. It's just a really good team.
Well, and they needed some depth and maturity in the pitching ranks, and they brought in Dan Herron, who, I mean, he had a couple of rough years with the Angels, but he was also pitching against the Rangers and the Yankees and some powerhouse lineups. How do you think Herron is going to fit in with this squad?
I think that's a fair point. You move someone to the move from the AL to the NL generally comes with benefits. You get to see the pitchers in the lineup, and I think if Dan Herron's healthy, I mean, that's a huge boost for them. Edwin Jackson was pretty good last year. He was a solid 4 or 5 starter for them. So Dan Herron, hopefully if he's the guy that he was a couple of years ago, that rotation is easily the best in baseball. If he's not, there's obviously he doesn't have to carry the freight here with Strasburg and Gio Gonzalez and Jordan Zimmerman and all that. So it's a calculated risk, and they're hopeful that he can stay healthy and kind of provide them, with a guy that can go deep into games well into the season.
Hey, can I ask you a question, Brian, about Davey Johnson? Because
Absolutely.
To your point, I think he also seems to actually answer the questions, which so many people in his position do not. They just, they'd rather poke their eyes out with a sharp stick than talk to reporters. Right. But he seems, I don't know if he enjoys it, but he tolerates it. He seems to answer the questions. He also strikes me as a very smart man. Is that true? Do you think he's a smart guy, or is he just a really good manager?
No, I think, Tori, he's smart in the way we usually mean that. He is just a smart guy. He is a step ahead of most people in terms of communication, in terms of just getting his message out. He is as blunt a manager or a coach as I've ever covered. He just, what you said is correct. He will answer any question put to him. And he always, it's always with an eye towards, you always feel like there's a message being sent, whether it's to a player, whether it's to whoever. And it's obviously refreshing. Sometimes you wonder, when his player, I always imagine like his player watching one of his press conferences and just doing a spit take when he hears something Davey says. I mean, it's just one of those things. He's a very engaging guy, and I really do think his confidence rubs off on his players. I mean, he says stuff the way Bryce Harper did. He says World Series or bust too.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. And listen, the Washington Nationals, as you said, they had some needs and they filled them. They got a center fielder, also leadoff hitter. They've bolstered their bullpen. They've got another starter. And the last new entry, of course, is William Howard Taft as the new president for the president's race. Really quickly, Brian, do you have any sort of inkling as to how Taft is going to do against Roosevelt Washington and the rest of them?
He's so big. How is he going to win? How's the guy in that costume going to generate enough force to get down the base path there?
I understand Chris.
He's going to stop for a sandwich along the way.
I think Chris Christie is giving him some training tips, so we're going to be fine there. All right, Brian, listen, we'd love to have you back as the season develops. Thanks for joining us.